Okay, well, my name's Morna Simpson. I'm here to talk about Flock Edu, which is a new business that I'm opening or launching this September. What we do is we've created an online bit of software that is an open market connecting teachers with adult learners and low-cost venues for face-to-face classes. I thought about subtitling my talk, £25,000 away from changing the world, because I really do believe it is that disruptive and it can be that beneficial to people. So Jamie asked me to talk about my own story, and I thought I'd talk about what tipped me over the edge. 2009 was the year that I got tipped over the edge. Until that point, I'd worked as a full-time lecturer in a university, quite happily, loved my students, loved what we were doing there, really exciting stuff in interactive media. But in 2009, that was also the year for me where things were broken. Now, I do mean that in a very physical sense. It was a year when I had an accident that would ultimately lead to me becoming a cyborg. And that hip had to be removed and replaced because I'd fractured it in this fall. That didn't happen until a couple of years later, but at that time, a lot of other things were broken too. The economic crash had happened the year earlier, and it was starting to have an impact on education. And I was sitting in my bed at home in my flat, getting really kind of depressed, watching news coverage of students taking to the streets to complain about what was going on, and feeling very much that I couldn't actually be part of that. It was very frustrating. So what was actually happening in education at the time? Well, there were escalating costs for students. There was deteriorating service as skill-based jobs were lost from education at university level. Teaching became unmanageable. So many of my friends were saying, I'm teaching 4 times the amount of classes. I run from one room to another. I don't have any time to support the students. I literally have to throw a book at them or tell them to learn it themselves. Learning therefore became very theory-heavy and very kind of skills-weak, because obviously skills are the thing that you can really teach very well face-to-face. And higher education and further education in general, obviously not for all courses, not for all universities everywhere, but in general, accreditation was becoming more like a lucky dip. You didn't actually know what you were going to get when you signed up for a course. And at the other side of things in industry, I was hearing a lot of people who were colleagues in industry complaining that the people coming out of the universities were not coming with those hands-on skills. They were unable to hit the ground running, and they were having to do the training in-house, which was something they couldn't afford to do a lot of the time. It also struck me that the economics was quite strange. I mean, the economics of a program, I mean, I'm looking at this and saying, well, this is a typical program. Obviously, programs vary quite a lot. But if you've got 30 students, and we're looking at England, £9,000 a head, times 3 years to get your course, that's £810,000. And yet, a teacher or lecturer is expected to teach that amount in that amount of time, and their average salary is £38,000. So there does seem to be a little bit of money lost in overheads. After all, a lot of teaching really only needs a room, a teacher, and 30 or so adult learners. So what was happening at a high level? There were high-level issues such as accommodation, bureaucracy and regulation, which were costly, inefficient and unresponsive. And to be honest, they'd been that way for years. This was just the thing that was going to push them over the edge. On the ground, the courses were cut, visiting lecturers were cut, skills-based teachers were cut, and you ended up with these theory-heavy courses which were skills weak, and without those visiting lecturers creating that bridge to industry, a lot of those industry links were lost. But the worst thing about it was, on returning to university to teach again, I just felt that everybody felt disempowered. It wasn't a nice environment anymore. Teachers felt unable to provide the skills, graduates felt that they couldn't do the work, and industry felt that they weren't going to get the right people. So it was very frustrating and not a nice environment. And I just want to kind of take the clock back a bit to 1979, because 1979 was when I learned a really important lesson about empowerment. And it's something that has stayed with me really all my life, even though I was a very young kid at the time. At that time, Blue Peter, everybody's smiling in recognition, started their bring and buy sales. Now, there was a famine, I think it was Cambodia, I think this particular appeal was about, and they were trying to reach a target of £1 million. I found this really inspiring. I spoke to my headmaster and said, can we run a bring and buy sale here? Really keen to do it. And he said, yes, you can, but only provided you do it yourself. And so I recruited a bunch of kids from the school, primary 5 to primary 7. And we got together and we organised the thing. And it was a great experience, you know. Kids brought in their skateboards, they brought in their toys, they brought in their books. And then there was an exchange of money and we sold them and we made money. Now, we were a small school and it wasn't a huge amount of money and we weren't terribly rich, but we contributed to that £1 million target. And it was an absolutely amazing feeling. It was just really unfortunate that a few months later, this is the type of thing we saw in the news. The money had been going to, the money was being raised to buy food for the people who were starving and to buy them trucks to transport the food throughout the country and to take it to the most needed areas. But what actually happened was that none of the food got through, they didn't have the money for the fuel, and they couldn't take it to the places that needed it most. So it was heavily criticised in the news, and I remember it so well at the time, the idea that we were providing one thing but not providing the means. So we were providing the trucks but not providing the fuel. It was a big flaw in the plan. And my dad spoke to me, and it made it really simple for me to understand. He said, give someone a fish and they'll eat for a day. Give them a net and they'll eat for a lifetime. And it's something that I've always remembered. So several years later, 1989, I'm deep in practice. This is me on my own learning and my own voyage of discovery. I was at art school at the time, where doing things is really at the heart of learning. You do things, you make things, you practice all day long. I didn't realise at that time that it's quite different from a lot of other types of learning. When I was learning art and design, you chose your own learning path, you chose your own themes, and you chose your own ideas. Those were the things you explored. You had absolute freedom to do that. You learned stuff by doing it. It was very physical as well as intellectual. You use all the senses, particularly in craft. Touch is extremely important. Your subconscious guides you. Not everything is about conscious thought. Practice is about your body learning things as well. You have support from your tutors, you have support from your peers. We had these things called art crits, which some of you may be familiar with, where you show your work and everybody gets involved in telling you what's wrong with it and what's right with it. And yeah, it sounds, sometimes it was horrible, I admit it, but it was also very constructive because you had to learn how you learn from everybody around you, and it was a big kind of community experience. But knowledge, importantly, came through process and practice and lots more practice. Another important difference is that tutors worked in industry and were practicing artists. And that, at the time, I think, was quite different from what was happening in universities, which were separate at that point, where you would have researchers. But that link was very, very strong, and it's much weaker now. I went on to study in this rather austere-looking building, where I learned about teaching. And I went on to become a secondary school teacher. When I was learning about secondary school teaching, there were a number of concepts that we were provided with that were very strong. There are things I'm sure everybody who's an educator will be familiar with. Student-centred learning is proven to work. Hands-on practice-based work is really important. Working in groups or working with peers really aids learning. If you integrate sciences and arts or lots of other different disciplines, there's a more holistic approach to that learning, and the learning sticks with you longer. And we were also told to give project briefs that foster creativity, that enable people to become empowered and to make their own decisions. Now, these were not new ideas, and I'm sure educators in the room will know that. They'd been around from at least the 60s and probably long before that. And they were certainly used very widely in primary school teaching at the time. But along with these ideas, which seemed novel in secondary schools, there were other things happening. The year where I was actually studying, teaching, there was the introduction of a compulsory written exam into standard grade art and design. If you failed that, you failed everything. And that was thought was incredibly sad. To me, it was as ridiculous as pitching for venture capital through the medium of dance. Just a nonsense. And it was as if they'd taken this idea that the physical manifestation of an image wasn't a manifestation of knowledge in its own right. And I'm sure you've all heard Ken Robinson talking about our bodies and asking the question, are our bodies just a convenient way to take our brains to a meeting? It seemed even more absurd because writing had been around for such a long time, and we were on the verge of something really new, and everybody knew about it. We were already seeing computers in schools being used and beginning to become quite widely used. So take it on another 10 years, 1999. For me, that was a year where things became about human connectedness. It was the year I first started developing my own work and putting it online. I did a master's degree and I started designing websites. It wasn't long before I was uploading videos, animations and games, websites, wikis, service-based sites and the whole lot. So I made a switch out of secondary school teaching and into multimedia design, as it was called at the time. To me, it was hugely exciting. Seeing how the web was just beginning to take off was like an extension of knowledge and culture and society, an extension of your brain, if you like. And we all know that to be hugely important. This is a diagram showing a network of resources as they're used around the world. And we can see like where there's well-connected resources, well-connected channels, those are countries which tend to be richer, where better things are happening. Poorer countries, poor Mongolia up there, is very isolated and has literally no connection with the outside world. Connections are very important when sharing ideas or when creating inventions. They're very important for innovation. This is the Silicon Valley Inventors Network, and it shows how well connected the people who are the red dots coming out of Stanford are with a range of other industries in the area. And that networking is very, very important to the amount of innovation that happens in that area. And more recently, we've seen maps like this being produced where we look at the number of shared research projects coming out of Europe. This is the Elsevier network over Europe, and it shows where the linkages are between successful published papers. And again, that's where you see all the innovation happening, where you see wealth being created and change happening. So back to 2009, oops, does that sound different? Back to 2009 and being broken. By this time, I developed quite a strong online network myself, and with only one arm working, 140 characters seemed like a good size of text to be typing at any one time. And I became an avid Twitterer over the next 3 months. We saw Twitter really go from being something where people asked each other about coffee to being something that had absolutely massive influence on the world. And it seemed to me that all of this was really about empowerment. But there was going to be, obviously, revolutions been around for a long time. And here people were taken to the streets demanding a better life. But underneath it all, there was also that kind of concern. I mean, I'm sure you know about the FBI and CIA manipulating people online and how this was known as sock puppets. And all of this stuff came to the fore at exactly the same time. So it was a really interesting year where a lot of interesting things were going on. There were also a lot of interesting learning resources and tools being developed. Games was really coming to the fore as something that could be used in an educational context. Here we see like real-world mapping with a shape game that's used on the iPad, and that's used for early learning. So the learning here is both physical and it is also, intellectual as well for early learners. But there's been like a number of fantastic learning tools out there for a long time. Instructables are brilliant. I've been using them for years. This one's about how to build your own computer. And I'm sure you all know them, but quite often they're just images with instructions by them. Sometimes they're also video. And there's been like a flurry of more and more educational resources over the last couple of years. Now I'm going to have to flick quickly through a number of things because I'm realizing I'm short of time. So I'm going to say, well, after looking at all of these things, I decided that I really needed to do something about the situation in education myself. So what was my aim? Well, I had to ask myself, what should a university do? If the universities aren't going to be there anymore, or if they're not going to provide the same type of learning as they did previously, what should they do, and what is actually going to work online? Well, a university usually provides a room, a teacher, and some adult learners. That was a good starting place. I wanted to fix what was broken. I wanted to fix lifelong learning. I wanted to be responsive to supply and demand in industry and in society. And I wanted to create strong links with industry. I felt face-to-face teaching was incredibly important because teachers can be responsive to student needs. Learners get support from teachers and peers. And it's a perfect environment for skills-based learning as well. And I wanted to empower people. I wanted to create something that would enable everybody to teach, it would enable everybody to learn, and it would enable anybody who had a venue to be able to offer that venue out. So Twitter to the rescue. Twitter had become my friend by this time and I had about 5,000 followers. I had an idea about what I wanted to create it, and I put some tweets out saying, fight back against the cuts in education. I told them what kind of skills I was looking for, Ruby on Rails, front-end skills, and we're going to have these sweatshops where we create a product. I had a number of responses immediately. I had 22 responses in the first day, and that was when I thought I'm really onto something here. And it was only after I had those responses that I decided I was definitely going to go with it. So I organised 3 weekend-long hackathons where I'd harness my network and the people that I knew from tweeting online and use their skills to create a product. Before I did that, there was a lot of preparation. I had to create numerous designs because I wanted it to pull together as a completed product. There was about 100 or so screenshots like this, which are actually just wireframes, but which were a guide to all the developers who came and took part. And I had to remember that this opportunity was all about people. There were going to be 3 weekends to create this project. There were 3 chances to use the best talent in the room. We had to be goal-orientated and not task-orientated, and I had to give people the freedom to do what they wanted, an opportunity to excel, and remember that when that was over, that was it really over. So I had to be very modular in the way I was thinking. I also had to be very tight around legislation because what I planned on doing was giving away shares for taking part in building my product. So I got in lawyers and I had very kind of well, actually, they were quite open-ended contracts written up, but ones which protected IP and still enabled people to take part in the workshops. After that, it's the usual thing of pulling together a venue, getting loads of pizza, getting loads of beer, trying to ignore the chaos that was happening elsewhere, which coincidentally was happening the first weekend of our sweatshops. And it was quite a significant thing, I think, to feel that there was a revolution of some kind going on, some really negative thing happening externally, where awful things were happening. Whereas inside, there was a lot of positive energy. We had amazing people come, and a lot of people were going to put their energy into a revolution of an entirely different sort to build something new. So this is a shot of some of the people that turned up. There were 31 in total over the 3 different weekends. Not everybody could come to all of them. We did the usual thing of trying to inspire people and tell them what the project was about. And then we provided them with methods which were particularly social. I don't want to spend too long because I'm running out of time already. So as usual, we put them together in a room. We had a lovely big space with great broadband, and they just got to work. And actually, apart from asking me lots of questions about the business model itself and then refining that, they got on with it themselves. They were very well managed. They didn't need a lot of support. They didn't need a lot of structure. Excuse me. And the other thing I should mention is that they were all pros. There were very few students in the room. I think there were 2 students there. And a lot of people who were in the 30 to even, I think now 80 grand salary bracket. So these were not beginners, these were people who actually believed in doing something. So what is Flock Edu? Basically, venues can advertise space and facilities, teachers can advertise the classes, and adult learners can buy tickets for short courses. It's very people-focused. There's a consensus-based rating system. We don't have any accreditation. We've social spaces online, forums and so on for class discussions. And the sharing and linking to online learning resources. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We believe that there's an awful lot of excellent learning resources out there already. And that's what I used when I was teaching as a lecturer. That's, I'm sure, what a lot of people would use face-to-face. And my ambition with this was very much revolution, not evolution. I do want to be disruptive with Flock Edu. I do want to change the world. And I do believe it's possible. I don't believe that it conflicts with anybody, although I'm talking a lot about universities. I think it could be a brilliant support for universities in their current state. It can support people into university, it can support people through university, and it can support people with skills-based learning out the other side if they're looking at changing a job. So I'm only short of £25,000 of getting this thing finished and to a highly polished level. If there's anybody rich in the room, you know where to find me. Please do come and talk. But I'm just going to quickly give you a little show about what Flock Edu is about.
Flock Edu is an open marketplace for learning and teaching in the UK. It connects teachers with adult learners and low-cost venues, facilitating reliable and local face-to-face classes.
Want to learn? You can. Get extra supported study to pass exams or access your ideal higher education course, develop new skills and knowledge for a career change or your dream job. Open your mind to new ideas by learning at leisure. Want to teach? You can. Fund your PhD or supplement your day job by teaching part-time. Experienced teachers can commit to full-time and develop comprehensive programs by matching classes with colleagues. Fit your teaching around your lifestyle. Want to advertise your venue? You can. Make extra cash renting your venue to classes in downtime. Get profits from facilities and services that you already offer, and help grow a new client base in your community. Join our community now and get something started in your area today.
Okay, that's it everybody. Thank you very much for listening.